at your places. I am Priyanka Bish from Ardent Progressive School, and in today's session we'll be discussing about the third chapter of business studies, which is private, public and global enterprises. In the previous class we have studied about the different forms of business organization in private sector. So here we will be discussing about some corporation or some companies which comes under public sector and global enterprise. So before starting the chapter, first we will differentiate between public and private companies. So now here we will discuss some difference between private company and public company. We know private companies are those companies which are owned by an individual or managed by an individual, whereas public companies are those companies which are owned and managed by government. So here are some point of difference between private and public company. First is number of members. So in private company, minimum 2 members are required and maximum 200 members are required. Whereas in public company, minimum 7 members are required and maximum there is no limit. So first difference is minimum 2 members are required to form private company and maximum there can be 200 members. Whereas in public company only 7 members are required to form and maximum there is no limit. Second difference is number of directors. So in private company there can be minimum 2 directors, whereas in public company minimum 3 directors are required. Directors are the person who controls and manage the company. So in private company only 2 members or 2 directors are required, whereas in public company only 3 minimum directors are required. Third point of difference is invitation to general public. So in private company, it does not allow the public to subscribe its share, whereas it allows general public to subscribe its shares. So in private company does not allow the general public to subscribe its shares or debentures or public deposit, whereas in public company it allows the general public to subscribe its shares. Fourth is prospectus. Does not need to issue prospectus, whereas it is compulsory to issue prospectus in case of public company. So here private company does not need to issue the prospectus to the general public, because here general public is not allowed to subscribe the share of the company. So there is no need to issue the prospectus also. Whereas in public company, as we know, the general public subscribe the shares of public company. So it becomes compulsory for the public company to issue prospectus to general public, so that general public can know about the company through the prospectus. Transfer of shares. So here it does not permit to transfer the shares, whereas in public company there is free transfer of shares. So the shares of the private company does not transfer, it cannot be transferred to any third party, whereas there can be free transfer of shares of the public company to the third party. Now the last point of difference is legal formalities. So private companies are exempted from legal formalities, whereas in public company it is compulsory to follow legal formalities. So here, to form private company, it is not necessary to follow legal formalities. Without legal formalities, a private company can form, whereas in public company, it is necessary to follow legal formalities so that the public company can be formed. So these were some difference between the private company and public company. Now in the previous chapter, which was forms of business organization, we have studied the different forms of business organization which comes under private sector. So in private sector, we have studied about different forms of business organization which were sole proprietorship, then partnership form of business organization, Hindu undivided family, then joint stock company, and also cooperative society. So these were some form of business organization which comes under the category of private sector: sole proprietorship, partnership, Hindu undivided family, joint stock company, and cooperative society. All these forms of business organization are of private sector. So in this chapter, we will be studying about the companies which comes under public sector. Now, in public sector means the company which is owned and managed by government. There are three forms of business under public sector. First is departmental undertaking. Second is public corporation, or we can also call it as statutory corporation. And third is government company. So these are the three forms of business organization which comes under the category of public sector: departmental undertaking, public corporation or statutory corporation, and government company. So in this session, we'll be discussing about departmental undertaking and statutory corporation. Now, before starting the chapter, we will discuss all types of business organization we come across in our daily life. So in a neighborhood market, there are many shops which are owned by sole proprietorship, and there are big retail organization also which is run by the company. Also, there are people providing you the services like legal services, medical services, and these are owned by more than one person. And we know the services or organization which are owned by more than one person are known as partnership firms. So these are all privately owned organizations, which means these are the organizations which are owned by the private sector, and it comes under the category of private sector. Now, apart from the private organizations, there are other offices and other business organizations which are owned by the government. For example, railway is an organization which is wholly owned and managed by the government. Also, the post office in our locality is also owned by the government of India. But nowadays in cities and towns, our dependencies on these government postal services has been reduced because plenty of private courier services firms are operating in bigger towns. Then there are businesses which operate in more than one country, which is known as global enterprises. So we have observed that all types of organizations are doing business in our country, whether they are private, public, or global. Now we will discuss the role of private sector versus public sector since independence. इंडिपेंडेंस से पहले और इंडिपेंडेंस के बाद पब्लिक सेक्टर और प्राइवेट सेक्टर के क्या इंपॉर्टेंट रोल थे. So after independence, the Indian government nationalized many enterprises. The Industrial Policy Resolution of 1948 and 1956 was passed, and according to this policy, it assigned dominant role to the public sector enterprise, which means many areas of business were reserved for public sector, and the entry of private sector was restricted. In spite of restricted entry, the private sector continued to grow and contribute in the economic development of the country. And by giving priority to the public sector, this sector could not do much for the economic development of the country. That is why in 1991, the government of India adopted the policy of liberalization and globalization. Now, under this policy, private sector was assigned an important role, and the many entry barriers on private sector was removed. Due to these changes, there is tremendous improvement in the economic development of our country, which means now there is more open and competitive environment between the public and private sector. Moving on to the Indian economy. So when it comes to Indian economy, as we know, India is a mixed economy. Mixed economy means it has adopted both socialist and capitalist economy. Due to this, both private and public sector are in existence. Now, if you go for a socialist economy, what will happen? You will find only public sector working, whereas in capitalist economy, it could be the private sector who would be working. So if we divide the public sector is divided into three categories. First is departmental undertakings, second is statutory corporation, third is government companies. And private sector is divided into many organizations such as sole proprietorship, partnership, joint Hindu family business, cooperative societies, companies, which includes public and private company, and also the multinational corporation. We have studied the private sector's types of organization in the second chapter. Now we will discuss some public sector enterprise. Now, before discussing the types of public sector, let us first understand what is public sector. So, public sector is an organization which is managed or owned partly or wholly by central or state government. The government acts through people, its offices, employees, and they take decision on behalf of the government. And public sector is accountable to public through Parliament. So as we know, there are three types of public sector enterprises. So the first type is departmental undertaking. This is the oldest form of public sector enterprise. The departmental undertaking is considered as one of the department of the government itself. It has no separate existence than government, which means it is fully controlled and managed by the government, and it functions under the overall control of one ministry or department of the government. Some examples of departmental undertakings are railways, defense, post and telegraph, broadcasting, telephone services, etc. So these are the departments which are controlled and managed by the Department of Government. Next is some features of departmental undertakings. So the first feature is they operate under the overall control of one of the ministries of state or central government. Second is they are a part of government only. There is no separate entity. Third is they are financed from the annual budgets of the government. Next is The revenue of departmental undertakings are deposited in the treasury of the government. The staff of departmental undertakings are civil servants and they are recruited and compensated as per the rules of civil servants. Now, moving on to the merits or advantages of departmental undertakings, the first advantage is easy formation. It is very easy to form a departmental undertaking as no registration is compulsory. Second is effective control. The control on departmental undertaking is very effective as it is direct and centralized. Third is optimum utilization of funds. So in departmental organization, there is optimum utilization of funds as financial matters are the subject of ministerial sanction, budget, accounting and audit control. Third is accountability. So there is direct parliamentary control because the performance of departmental undertakings is discussed in parliament. So there is public accountability. Last is public revenue. The revenue of departmental undertaking is deposited in the treasury of the government. We have discussed this on the features of departmental undertaking. So these undertaking helps to increase the government revenue. So at last, we will discuss the demerits or disadvantages of departmental undertakings. So the first demerit is inflexibility. As we know, departmental undertakings works under the parliamentary control. So there is too much interference of ministries and top officials as it is treated as one of the government offices. This reduces the flexibility and efficiency of the undertaking. Second is lack of motivation. Departmental undertakings have no power to utilize their revenues because these revenues are deposited in the government treasury. So there is no incentive to maximize profit, no direct relation between the efforts and rewards, and the promotions in the departmental undertakings are on the basis of seniority and not on the basis of efforts. So employees are not motivated to perform to their best ability. Third is lack of financial autonomy. It means these undertakings cannot plan long-term investment projects because they are subjected to budgetary control of government. They are not allowed to use their revenue freely as they have to be deposited into treasury of the government. Fourth is inefficient management. These undertakings are managed by the government officials and these officials are overburdened with the paperwork. So they maximum spend their time to answer the queries from the parliament or the ministry. Next is red tapeism and bureaucracy. It refers to the delay in decision due to too many administrative formalities, paperwork, procedures, etc. And the last disadvantage is suitability. So these undertakings are suitable in the cases where the government control is necessary, for example, broadcasting, where huge investment is involved, for example, aircraft, iron and steel, etc., and where the undertaking is a source of revenue, for example, railways. Statutory corporation. So, statutory corporation is a body corporate formed by a special act of parliament or by the central or state legislature. And it is fully financed by the government. Its powers, objects, limitation, etc. are also decided by the act of legislature. So basically it is a type of corporation which is managed and owned by the parliament, act of parliament, or by the state or central government, and all its powers, limitations, objectives are decided by the act of legislature. For example, Indian Airlines, Air India, State Bank of India, Life Insurance Corporation of India, Oil and Natural Gas Corporation, etc. These are the examples of statutory corporation. So here are some features of statutory corporation. First feature is It is created by an act of parliament or central or state legislature, as we have discussed earlier. The powers, objectives, and limitation of public corporation are defined in the act only. It operates under total control of central or state government. Next feature is it is managed by the board of directors who are nominated by the government. The main motive of public corporation is service to general public. The accounts of public corporation are generally audited by the comptroller and auditor general. Or we can say these are generally audited by CAG. Now here are some advantages of statutory corporation. So the first advantage is administrative autonomy. As we know, public corporations are basically owned and managed by the government. So the government manage the affairs of the public corporation or the functions of the corporation with independency and flexibility. Second is quick decision. Public corporation can make a quick decision as there is less file work, less formalities to be completed before taking decision. So decision can be taken quickly. Third is service motive. All the activities of public corporation are discussed in the parliament. Their functions, their objectives, everything is discussed in the parliament. So this ensures the protection of public interest. Next advantage is efficient staff. As the statutory corporation can have their own rules and regulations regarding the salaries and recruitment of employees, so they provide better facilities and attractive terms of service to the staff so that they can work effectively and efficiently. And the last advantage is professional management. As the board of directors of statutory corporation consists of business experts and they also represents the various groups such as laborers, consumers, they are nominated by the government. So we can say there is a professional management in statutory corporation. At last, we will discuss the disadvantages of statutory corporation. So the first disadvantage is autonomy on paper only, which means जो गवर्नमेंट की डिपेंडेंसी है पब्लिक कॉर्पोरेशन में वो सिर्फ पेपर पे है. Practically, the ministers, governments, and the political parties, they don't interfere with the working of these companies. Second is lack of initiative, which means public corporation do not face any competition because their main motive is service motive. They are not guided by the profit motive. So the employees do not take initiative to increase the profit and reduce the loss. That is why the losses of public corporation are made good by the government. So there is lack of initiative to make profit for the corporation. Third is rigid structure, which means the objectives and powers of public corporation are defined by the act, which means जितने भी public corporation के objectives हैं, powers हैं, ये कहाँ decide किए जाते हैं? ये decide किए जाते हैं act के through. और कभी भी हमें इसमें amendment लाना हो या change लाना हो, वो हम कैसे ला सकते हैं? उस act को, किसी भी नए act को pass करके. And amending the act is a time consuming and complicated task. So that is why it has a rigid structure. And the last disadvantage is unfair practices. So statutory corporation basically charge unduly high prices to cover up its inefficiency. So suitability of public corporation is under where the undertakings require monopoly powers, where the undertaking requires special powers defined by the act, or where the undertaking requires regular grants from the government. So these are the areas where the statutory corporation is suitable. In the next session, we'll discuss the last type of public sector enterprise. So that's all for today. Thank you.